Good to have you all back on your designated seating areas. And it's my pleasure to introduce Art Murray, who's our keynote speaker today. Art, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for accepting this invitation, because it does require a significant amount of courage. First of all, you are in an alumni gathering, which means you are, if you're not an alumnus of this gathering, it is a little formidable. And then we are a bunch of Indians. And so that would even be more formidable, especially given the cultural differences. Here's a little bit of background on Art. There is a whole page written up on him, and I'm not going to just read out from there. But I would like to point out a few things. Art is the head of Applied Knowledge Sciences. It's an organization that he has built. And he's also Chief Fellow of the George Washington University Institute for Knowledge and Innovation, where he's the co-founding director of the Enterprise of the Future program. He's also a member of the National Speakers Association, a keynote speaker in several conferences, editorial board member, and reviewer for several scientific journals, and has been featured in numerous trade publications and radio programs. He holds a BSc and MEA degrees in Engineering Administration from GW and BSEE from Lehigh. Now, apart from that, the title of his talk today is The Enlightened Entrepreneur, Solving Business Challenges by Expanding Your Awareness. Art's area of specialization, or his passion as he defines it, is knowledge transfer. And anything related to the knowledge transfer, knowledge management area. And and I asked him to elaborate a little bit upon that, and he's essentially going to talk about it. But one area that he gave me an example of in knowledge transfer is basically in organizations when personnel or employees retire, for example, there is a tremendous amount of knowledge that, if not harnessed, can essentially get lost. And so that is an important and integral component of knowledge transfer. That's one such application that he talked about. And he has a lot of experience in the government sector. He's worked in the Middle East, he's worked in Malaysia, and I'm sure he'll talk about several other countries that he's worked in. His focus is on blending Eastern and Western approaches to knowledge transfer, and that would be very interesting to hear about, because that's something, especially, I'm kind of curious to see first of all, what the cultural differences are in terms of knowledge transfer, and how do you blend that, especially now that we have a global world, everyone's working together with each other, even though we don't understand each other's languages, but we seem to be working together. So I think it would be fascinating to hear that. So with that, I would like to welcome Art. And Art, thank you very much again for participating.
Thank you, Tyron.
Just one request. I know it's a little noisy. Can you come up? If you can come up, there are plenty of chairs here. Feel free to turn them up so that we don't miss on what Art has to tell us.
Okay, thank you. This is rather an amazing group. I mean, I'm really enjoying the interaction here. You're very, very unique, but I can see you enjoy very good food, because that buffet out there was just fantastic. So I always try to learn a little bit about the language, because you can see I have dealt with and worked on projects in other countries, and so I try to learn a little bit of the language. With regard to Hindi, maybe, I think I might have picked up a few words, and I like to call it survival Hindi, or whenever I pick up a language, survival Arabic. It's like, if I were accidentally dumped in the middle of India somewhere where nobody else speaks English, what were the words, what are a couple of phrases that I would need to know in order to survive? So what I'm getting, and let me try this out on you, would be something like, Dal kala chapati hai, masala chai hai. So if I say words like that, I can at least survive, right? Those are essentials to survival. Because you've got all this wonderful food here. So that's central to Indian. Yes, Sudh here.
All you need now is the iTranslate app.
Oh, the iTranslate app. Okay. Good. I'll have to work on that. So, and then, IIM, and I myself am an engineer, so I, have met people from IIT, but they're probably the evil empire to you, right? To you guys.
About a third of the IIM alumni are from IIT.
Oh, okay, so you get together, because I was thinking we were talking about cricket. Wouldn't it be great to have an IIT, IIM cricket tournament every year or something like that?
Of course.
Yeah, you can have the II World Cup. So, here's fun. I really, now, I know I have to be careful because you see Ashima coming from PwC, she has me on the clock. I mean, everything at PwC works on the clock. I mean, it's down to the second, right? I mean, this is something, so I have my clock here. I'm going to be very careful about the time. I appreciate people sharing a little bit about themselves, and so I can start by sharing a little bit something about myself that I don't often share. And that's from early childhood. It's kind of got me to where I am today, so I guess it's a part of me. But since early childhood, I've suffered from something called OCLD. Has anybody ever heard of OCLD? Yes, it's called Obsessive Compulsive Learning Disorder. It's the uncontrollable urge to know everything there is to know about everything. And if you ever came to my house, you would see that the reason we have some of the lowest energy bills of anybody in the neighborhood is because the walls are lined with books. And some of you some of you may suffer from this also. So we should get together if you recognize these symptoms. But that, as you'll see, led to where I am. And to just leap a little bit about my story, because Aaron mentioned GW was a large part of shaping to what led me to become an entrepreneur. And I was doing my master's degree at GW at that time, engineering administration, which is like an MBA for engineers, engineering administration, business administration. So I kind of liked that. I was a pure engineer, double E, so very techie oriented. So at least the MEA brought in people, understanding of organizations and even business and management and all those aspects, which a lot of engineers never get. So that was very valuable. And it was also at the time in the 70s when we were going through an energy crisis here in this country. And my thesis advisor for my master's, he was the head of the environmental administration program at GW. So I did my master's thesis in that area, and then when I finished that, I asked him, hey, I'd like to go on for a doctorate. Would you be my advisor for that? And he said, sure. What would you want to do your PhD dissertation in? And I said, oh, it's the same thing, energy management that we're doing. And he said, oh, no, you don't. And of course, I'm the young graduate student, but I look at him and say, okay, what was it I was going to do my research in? And to tell you a story about my advisor, he got his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania at the time when you might have heard about econometrics. People were building econometric models back in the 70s, trying to model an entire economy so we can predict, we tweet this comes out the other end. So he took that and built what was called resometric models. He took the econometric modeling idea and applied it to resources. And that was his specialty, and that's what he taught me. And I didn't know this, but while I was working on my master's thesis, all this time, he was off studying something else. And they say, if you immerse yourself in a subject for about 3 years, you can become an expert on that subject. Well, he was proof of that. All the time, I was doing my master's, he was studying, guess what? Artificial intelligence, AI. And he started the Institute for Artificial Intelligence at George Washington University. So that's I find myself plopped into there. Just on a whim, just by chance and by luck. And within that, part of artificial intelligence, there is a branch called knowledge engineering. And that's where you try and figure out what's going on in the human mind, especially an expert, when they make a decision. What are they looking at? What are they looking for? What questions are they asking? What's spinning around in their head? How can you draw that out and maybe put it into a system so instead of in one person's head, that can be shared across an organization, that other people can see what's going on in that person's head and add to it and keep growing and growing that knowledge. So that became my passion right off the bat there, and it's been my passion ever since. And so I started a company, you read about it in the bio there, But one other interesting story about what really sealed it for me, one of our early customers in applied knowledge sciences was the World Health Organization. They have their Pan-American headquarters here in DC. So they are the headquarters for all of the Americas, North, Central, and South. And at the time we were working with them, it was the first outbreak of avian flu. You know, we've had a lot of pandemics since then, but avian flu was the problem, and they really couldn't get their member ministries of health from all these countries, and especially South America, to get prepared and to take steps. As if, you can detect avian flu, and if it occurs, you can quickly prevent the spreading of it and respond to it. So look for it and respond to it. They couldn't get their member countries to do anything. And so we were working with them on trying to get them to share their knowledge with all the different departments, and we were making some progress. The epidemiologist who we were working with was sitting down in the cafeteria one day, and someone sat across the table from him, and they had this conversation like we had here at lunch. Well, what do you do? And all that sort of thing. And it turns out the guy across from the epidemiologist worked in modeling and simulation. And so the epidemiologist said, oh, you mean you can simulate the outbreak of a disease and tell sort of how fast it will spread, and if you do something? He said, yes, that's what we do. Now they had been working on that problem, the epidemiologist had been working on the avian flu problem for 6 months. And here's the funny part of the story. They got together and put together a tabletop simulation. They took it out to all the ministries and they improved. They had a scoring system and they were all running around 30%, 30 on a scale of 0 to 100. They boosted all their responsive scores from 30 to like 70. So big impact by building this tabletop simulation, taking it out to the ministries and using that to teach them, this is something critical and here's how we respond to an outbreak of bird flu, avian flu. The funny part of that story is in the World Health Organization, guess where those two people were? The epidemiologist was on the 7th floor, sitting at a desk right here. Guess where the modeling simulation person who helped make that all come together was? Exactly 1 floor above, and the desk directly above him. They were 10 feet apart, but they didn't know that they were even there. They didn't even know they existed until they accidentally got together sitting across from each other in the cafeteria one day when the epidemiologist was struggling for 6 months. So that really sealed it at that point. I said, we've got to stop this madness of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So that just launched it. So part of entrepreneurship, and so before I get into entrepreneurship as to maybe some in a way that will help you, let me first of all, let me just see where you're at here. I'd say in your current position, raise your hand. First of all, if in your current position right now, raise your hand if you're working long hours and burning the candle at both ends. So Shima, raise your hand real high. Yeah. Okay. Now, keep your hand up if you feel that you are fulfilled in what you're doing and working to your full potential. All right, that's not bad. Because a lot of people I encounter are overworked and underappreciated. Okay, so that's something that, it's not a good situation. If you're in this situation where you're feeling appreciated, that's good. All right, how many of you have started your own company? Now, some of you are entrepreneurs here already. So raise your hand, please. You started your own company. Okay, great, good for you. How about how many of you have been thinking about starting your own company? Raise your hand. Come on. All right, so a few of you. Something usually, so there are 2 elements that at least did it for me. Number 1 was this passion and falling into it to help make knowledge flow where it wasn't flowing before. So that's actually the process of what I do. But then there's always something that kicks you over the edge. And I had been working in corporate America with a Fortune 100 company in R&D. It was actually work that I thought I was going to like, and ended up, you ever work for crazy bosses? How many of you work for a crazy boss? Okay, lots of crazy boss people here. So our crazy boss, I was one of 5 managers reporting to this crazy boss. And he began to get very paranoid, thinking that one of us was a spy going up to the president of the company and, talking about him. So instead of having our staff meetings, all of a sudden one day he decided he's going to meet with each of us separately. So instead of one staff meeting with the 5 managers, there would be 5 separate meetings with each of us. And this went on for a while. And one day, the 5 managers are down in the lunchroom, and we're talking among each other. Hey, wasn't it interesting that our crazy boss said that this is going to happen? And another guy says, no. He said this was going to happen. No. The third guy was saying, no, something totally different. We figured out that this crazy boss was telling each of us a different story, so that when the news would come down from the president's office, he felt he would be able to identify the spy. The trouble was, he got his stories all mixed up and he forgot what story he told to him. They were all spies. It was at that point then that I decided if I'm going to work for an idiot, I might as well work for myself. And I quit and went and started my own company. So now I'm no longer working for an idiot. I'm working for a complete lunatic. Because, those of you who are entrepreneurs, it's just crazy. It's you doing everything. So anyway, that kind of pushed me over. So here's the thing I wanted to now share with you. Akil, who unfortunately isn't here, said you wanted to learn about entrepreneurship. You wanted to hear about entrepreneurship. That's a topic that excites you. And I can tell you, maybe just 6 months ago, I get asked to talk about leadership. It's like, oh please, leadership, all right, or innovation. And entrepreneurship was pretty much the same thing. Talk about entrepreneurship. Oh, okay. Luckily, I'm going to give you share with you some ideas on entrepreneurship that I'm pretty sure you've never heard anywhere else. And this is only because another entrepreneur friend and I, and maybe a few others, have started developing this, and that's what I want to share with you now in this presentation. So, my co-partner in this new way to view, we call it enlightened entrepreneurship, and it's a way to expand your awareness, because now more than ever, the world, as you know, is extremely complex and getting more complex by the day, right? And it's changing faster and faster. So 2 things are happening that are making it very challenging to be an entrepreneur, or even to be in any business, even to be at PwC. It doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur, anything you're doing, it's challenging because I'm working for a crazy boss. It's a crazy world, fast changing and highly complex. So another entrepreneur that I've known and partnering with, Tom McCabe is his name, and I've got his name copyrighted there at the bottom. IT people will recognize Tom McCabe. They'll recognize that name because he came up with the McCabe complexity metric in software. So it's a way to measure complexity of software programs, and then a way to reduce the errors in programs that you wouldn't normally find. So he's a deep mathematician, understands mathematics like nobody else can. And so he and I got together and started developing this approach that I'm going to show you. The little trigger for Tom McCabe, the mathematician, was he was recently invited to give a keynote on entrepreneurship at Maharishi University out in Iowa. Okay, you've probably heard of that. And so I said, wow, that's interesting. So here's what we came up with. During my time in the Institute for Artificial Intelligence at GW, I really felt if I'm going to deal with transferring knowledge from an expert to other people, I really need to know more about the structure of knowledge. And there's a plow through, and I even did my own dissertation on it, and a lot of other research work on how knowledge is structured. And here in the West, it's very bland and very mundane, almost like a database. So if you work in databases, you know this thing called a schema. Well, knowledge engineering, at least when I was learning it at first, tried to do the same thing. They said, let's come up with a schema for knowledge. And it just wasn't working until I tapped into the Vedas of ancient India. Veda is the Sanskrit word for knowledge, right? And I looked at it and I go, whoa, look at this, how elegant, how clear. Every shloka in the Vedas has a Rishi Devata chandas, right? Rishi, so there's the observer, process of observation, and object of observation. Rishi Devata Chanda. Rishi literally means light or seer, right? Chandas over here is form, correct? So that's the thing, that's the object. And then Devata is the way the two interplay. And I said, wow, I think they've got it. Because at least in the East, from my study of Eastern philosophy, the focus is over here, the inner self, the inner stroke, right? Matter of fact, in some strict places over here, this chanda is the world, the objective reality. This is all mud, right? The world is something, that's not, the real reality is in here, and we should not become attached to the material world. Over on the West, where I was doing my dissertation, you could actually fail and get kicked out by having anything subjective in your research or your work. Subjectivity had to be out the window. Cannot have any subjectivity. Everything has to be purely objective science. And so these two worlds, I thought, were missing something, because they're also missing the thing in between, which is how does subjective and objective reality, how do they interplay with each other, and how does one impact the other? So that was my big aha, saying, so now if I'm going to try and work with knowledge, it requires all three of these things. Who is the person doing the observing? Who has the knowledge? What do they have knowledge about? How do they obtain that knowledge? And then, how do all of these things change? If you believe quantum physics, right, all the things we're learning about quantum mechanics is you cannot observe something without changing it, and you cannot observe something without being changed yourself. It ties all into this Vedic concept of Rishi Devata Chanda. Sorry, so that's all I'll talk about with respect to that. That's very rich stuff. I don't pretend to be a Vedic scholar, but I did, that part of the structure of the Vedas really grabbed my attention. And on the Western side, it's basically subject, process, object, okay? So, what Tom McCabe and I then went next, we said, okay, let's put entrepreneurship in this context and see what happens. And where the mathematician part, Tom contributed, in mathematics there's something called group theory. Anybody familiar with understand group theory? All right, so this is actually, in mathematics, let's say this term once, don't worry about it, dihedral group of order 3. And a dihedral group of order 3 means there are 6 different permutations of this kind of group. And so we said, aha, there's something there we can use in entrepreneurship. So here's the secret. The fundamental, that's the fundamental structure of knowledge. So to take the fundamental structure of business, and you know, IIM people, Peter Drucker said, what is the purpose of a business? What? Purpose of business? To create and keep a customer, right? So let's take that subject, process, object, Rishi Devata Chandas, and say, the process is transformation in the customer. So you transform the customer transforms you. Let's see what that looks like. And there are 6 ways, right, that this interaction can occur. You, the entrepreneur, the customer you are serving, and the process in between, the relationship between you and that customer, which is your business. With me so far? Okay, so we'll walk through 6 permutations of this. Here's number 1. This is the simple one. You transform the customer. This is the sell model. This is the common one, right? I've got a great solution for you. And boy, believe me, in the IT days, the heydays of the 80s and 90s where people were cranking out IT products, that was pretty much it. You get out there and sell, 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 sell. Okay, so it was all on us and customer, you know, we're going to transform you by selling you this wonderful product. And you know, so this is the first, what we're calling perspective, first of 6 perspectives. And can you think of anybody who fits this kind of model, who's very much, the emphasis is on the entrepreneur, and they basically push what they know out to the customer. Anybody know, can you think of some examples of somebody who follows that model? Consulting, yeah. And even in the product world, Bill Gates, right? These tend to be drivers. Steve Jobs, right? They're basically coming out. They've come up with the solution, and you have to abide by it. This is not open source stuff, right? That'll be another transformation. So, highly autocratic person comes out there and sells. Okay. Oh, and by the way, this is the ego. We've given a name to each of these six, or our perspective. This is kind of the ego. The ego is the primary driver in this first category, right? Now, when you do a transform, the first transform we're going to do here is take this subject, process, or object and say, what happens when you switch subject and object? What happens when you, the entrepreneur, trade places with the customer, right? That's this, right? So you now become the customer, and you say, I want to walk in the shoes of the customer. And what do you look like when the customer looks back at you, right? The customer becomes you, you become the customer. This is the empathy approach, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, are empathy oriented, very empathy driven, they're very empathic. You know, they want to walk a mile in the customer's shoes. Who do you know that's famous, that's very empathic, that would fit this model? The customer comes first, and the customer drives them. PwC. Actually, yeah, and I read an article in the Washington Post maybe last year, the top 10 least narcissistic CEOs in the U.S. You know who one of the top 10 people in that category in the U.S. were? Indra Nooyi. Yeah, she was one of the top 3 women and 10 CEOs in the United States that were non-narcissistic. So the exact opposite of that first one. Instead of ego-driven, they're all about the customer. And you know, a few others like John Nordstrom, the person who started Nordstrom's. You know, you go to Nordstrom, they're all about customer service. The founder of Domino's Pizza, right? You heard the stories about that, where if the pizza is late, it's free. And there was this one customer every day would order pizza, and he'd always claim it'd be late or cold or something's wrong with it. And yeah, Tom Monahan, the founder of Domino's, would say, "Yep, let him have it for free." And there, this guy had like 400 free pizzas, and he didn't say, "I don't care. This is important to me, keeping the customer happy." All right, so those are the 2 easy ones. There's the ego-driven, which we've seen a lot of, and then there's the empathy-driven. But here's a third one that's interesting: process-driven. So this is where you actually switch place with the process. The customer stays over here, right? So it's you, the process, and the customer. You and the process switch places, right? Now this means that the process is the driver through you, the entrepreneur, and the customer experiences that, okay? So what we're doing by looking at these different transformations, we say, what does the world look like? And you can see that if you're stuck in one mode, if you're stuck in ego mode, or if you're stuck in empathy mode, you may think empathy is a good thing, but you say, no, that's part of it. But how about the process transformation? Switch places with the process and see what that looks like. Now, people have done this, and the process is actually what creates the experience for the customer. So a person like this would be whom? You think of anybody who would fit into this category, where they're process-oriented, but for the benefit of the customer. Yeah, well, all right, Howard Schultz at Starbucks, right? He's all about did something very common, coffee, right? Which they said you're crazy for, you know, wanting to open up yet another coffee stand. But no, coffee was part of it, but the main reason people came to Starbucks and still do is the experience, the environment that's created there, right? So that, Howard Schultz was right on top of that. Charles Schwab, right, turning the stock, how you buy and sell stocks, turning that industry upside down, making it customer-centric. But process, just taking something that was a cumbersome process. Yes, this would be best exemplified by an entrepreneur who looks out there and says, why does somebody have to go through 15 steps when they only need to go through 1 or 2 clicks? Charles Schwab, let's see, and creating an experience, a memorable experience. So Disney, Walt Disney, and then Howard Eisner later. We're, again, looking at how can we create not just a process, but an experience for our customers that they won't forget. All right, so those are the three most common. And accountants, right? You're probably process-oriented, right? Because you look at that. So here's a fourth one that you don't see too often now. What happens when the customer and the process switch? And you notice I use a verb because customer here is a noun, but when the customer goes into the process, it's a verb. So what happens when you customerize the transformation, right? And the customer gets placed in here. You're still here from your vantage point, but you swapped the customer and the process of transformation, right? That can sometimes not work so well. And it can work well. Here's a situation where it worked well. Gordon Ramsay, you know about Gordon Ramsay? He's very famous. Do you know what drove him to fame? What his main driver was? Those stupid Michelin stars, okay? So clearly his customer, at that time, he understood you had to provide a good quality food and service. But it was the Michelin star that was really what it's after. He was after the process. And these are companies that, the Malcolm Baldrige Award, and in Europe it's EFQM, right? So these are companies that are driven by process first, and then maybe, whereas the number 3 before this, it was the customer. How can I do a process that helps the customer? Flips those two and says, process is paramount. I want to be a Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award winner, an EFQM Quality Award winner. I want to have 3 Michelin stars, and maybe or maybe not the customer will benefit from that. Okay, but it is important. It is something to look at. Okay, now, so those first 4, actually the first 3, number 2, 3, and 4, those translations were all just 2 positions being switched, right? We have 6 permutations for you group theory mathematicians, and the last 2 are the toughest, and these are 2 that people very rarely think about. And if you look at what we've been talking about, some entrepreneurs we have found, maybe 5%, not even 5%, maybe 1%, do this kind of thing naturally. They naturally have a strong ego, but not to the point where it overpowers their relationship with the customer. They feel empathy. They have a balance of strong ego with strong empathy, and they can dive into the processes, right? Not too many entrepreneurs do that. And if you think about where you are in this spectrum, I know me, I'm an engineer. Where do you think I am as an engineer? Ego, customer, or ego, empathy, or process? Process, right? Okay. So this has helped me expand, getting me out of process and into the customer's shoes, but also inching up my drive, because by being lost in process, I really didn't have much of an ego one way or the other. I gained satisfaction from coming up with cool processes. So that's what's been holding me back as an entrepreneur. And as you know, 85, 90% of entrepreneurs end up failing. I maintain a large part of those failures could be from lacking this kind of perspective. So here's the interesting one, okay? You and the customer switch places, and then the customer and the transformation situation. So there are 2 switches going on here in number 5. So this is an interesting one. And like I said, this is with Gordon Ramsay. Any politician. So Gordon Ramsay probably did it successfully. Most politicians use this. It's all about the polls, right? What do the polls say? And that drives their behavior. So when the polls, when J.D. Power, when the process drives what you do, it can be troublesome. But you also have to look at that. Finally, the 6th one, the last one is customer-driven experiences, right? So again, there are 2 switches here. You and the customer switch place, and then the transformation menu switch place, right? So now you've got the customer in the driver's seat. Through you, a transformation occurs. And probably the best example of this is where, have you heard the word co-creation? That's we're going around a lot right now, right? We're co-creating products. So companies that are engaged in co-creation with their customers actually come up with the ideas, right? So customers over here coming up with the ideas, through you make that transformation. Legos, right? Legos is a good example where most of the designs for all the latest Lego toys come from what people are sending them in. So, hey, here's something my kid put together. They say, wow, that's great. So people contribute. And social networking now, this is becoming really big. Another example would be, H.E. Lafley at P&G, Procter & Gamble. Remember, he left, had to come back. Procter & Gamble actually has cameras in your utility room. You're looking over your washing machine, seeing how you use their products, and then getting customer feedback, feeding that into their laboratory, into their R&D, and creating products that are customer driven. Okay? So, my message here then, and this is what I hope, hopefully, has anybody really thought of looking at the world, of your world in these 6 ways before? Okay, so appreciate that you have a natural tendency in maybe 1 or 2 of these, but you're missing out by at least not sitting back and maybe spending that time, maybe after you spend, that's right, you can't bring any notes or anything, so spend your 10 days, in total silence, reflection, meditation in the desert, and then come back and maybe do this exercise. But one more thing, where Tom McCabe and I took this then is, all right, so these are the 6 translations now that we need to stretch our brains. So an important part of this is where is home place. So you as an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, things apply. Do you agree this apply to everybody here? I'm not just talking, if you're not interested in being an entrepreneur, I hope this is still helping you. So here's where it comes into play. First figure out, okay, among these 6 perspectives, where do you as a person fit, right? So that'd be a good exercise to think about maybe when you leave here, even during the break. So where is your awareness center? So the first one, the ego type of centricity, that's the S type. That's when you're over here in the subject, in the Rishi side. You're ego-driven. I observe me, narcissistic, looking out after numero uno. But the other ego transformation was the SOP transformation. I meify the way I observe, right? That's like Steve Jobs, right? If you read the Steve Jobs autobiography, or the Steve Jobs biography by Walt Isaacson, he uses the term bending reality. What do they call it? The reality distortion field. They said Steve Jobs and the people who work for him called this thing the reality distortion field, where Steve Jobs, if he saw something, didn't like the way it was, he just saw it differently and insisted that it was the way he saw it. Now that was a lot to do with the driving the success of Apple. It may have driven his people crazy, but Apple would not have been Apple if Steve Jobs clearly was here, and he was here also, right? The reality distortion field. So that's an S type, so you may be in the, and remember, it's like anything, like those Myers-Briggs and DISC personality profiles you've been doing. One dominates, and not to say that that's 100% what you are, but usually one of these dominates. So this is the dominant S. The dominant empathy, okay, the O, when O dominates, this is you, right? Free hugs, right? You want to do something great for mankind, right? Always seeing yourselves in others, seeking total harmony, right? You want everything to be in balance, nice and harmonious, and that's fine. You see yourself as an instrument for change, for improving people's lives, right? So that's all the empathy part, and these are the 2 empathy transforms. So if you're empathic, you're very likely to be in one or both of these perspectives. These are the ways you view the world. So, just as an example, if you're here, maybe one place you want to start is go back to here and see, how can I, right? Maybe how can I beef up this? Not to the point where I'm a jerk, because people with too much ego are jerks, right? You don't want that. But, if this is everything I am, odds are you're probably not going to be successful, because you're missing that ego, which is a key element of providing drive and inspiration to people. Or you may be a P-type, process-oriented. This may be your primary perspective, right? And these are the two process ones we talked about. This is me, okay? This is this is my natural modality. I'm, like I said, OCLD, obsessive compulsive learning disorder. I'm trying to, from a little kid, I'm taking radios apart, changing the frequency. So I had my first little AM radio. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I got inside and started changing the little screws in there, and I found out I could change this frequency. I got all these stations from Europe instead of the crazy local stations. So, you know, seeks an explanation for everything, right? But we tend to be perfectionists also. And that can actually be to our detriment. So again, if you're a process-oriented person, that's fine. You may be one or two of these as your main modality. Try to balance that out, looking at the empathy. So here's a one-sheet exercise. We're going to post this, right? I'll pass that along to Suni and to Shima. And so it's some, one way or another, we'll get these slides up to you. But here's something very simple that you can take with you. Write a goals or challenge, either a goal you have or a challenge you're facing. Just make that as a statement, and then try to put that in terms of subject, process, object. So if your goal is to have a successful business, say start with the customer. So that's why we said entrepreneur transforms customer. So take whatever statement you have and put it in this form: subject, predicate, object, subject, process, object, and then do these translations, switch them around as we've done here, and then ask yourself, what does this problem or challenge look like from this perspective, from this perspective, from this? And some of you may, especially get down here, these are tough. The answer may not be apparent right away, may not quite pop you on. That's fine, let it kind of incubate. But definitely begin stretching your mind, right? Out of your own world, thinking out of the box, so out of your own box, out of your own cocoon, into these other perspectives. And then just ask yourself, what does the world look like? And then maybe off to the side or somewhere else, just jot down your thoughts. And you'll see how those thoughts will begin to inspire, will begin to generate ideas. And it did for us, because we were stuck I'll give you an example in our own work. That will close up. As we mentioned, it's trying to get people to transfer knowledge from other. Taryn, you mentioned that can be different culturally. Yes, when we were working in the Middle East, having done projects on knowledge transfer here in the States, I could never for the life of me get people here to tell stories. Because the person with a lot of knowledge and experience, they want to write down everything as case studies, because obviously we've gone to MBA school, we've probably done some work at PwC and places like that, and our whole life centers around case studies, right, or reports. So they want to document everything down in terms of a case history or something like that. And I couldn't for the life of me get those kinds of people in that mindset here in the States to get into the mode of telling stories, right? Just tell stories. Now we go over to the Middle East, and nobody even uses a computer. It was scary. Their computers were sitting on their desk and they were turned off. I was in shock. They get up and they walk from office to office, and they sit down and they talk. And that's how they exchange knowledge. And so we found out that if we were going to work with them, we had to set up something like a YouTube, which they loved. They didn't want to document a thing. So a large part of transferring knowledge is, hey, write down, document what you do. They're not going to do that. But they're happy to sit down in front of a camera, like with Rumi has, and and tell their story, but not write it down. West was different. They'd rather write it down than they're scared to death to talk in front of a camera. So anyway, that was an eye-opener for us, and that got us to move more into that appreciation of what it is on the customer side, what their culture is like, and then going into the process and saying, okay, how can we enhance instead of trying to get them to change their culture, which wasn't going to work, right? How can we then get into those other transformations, look at the process and see, okay, how can we enhance what they're doing in a process that allows them to keep their natural cultural tendencies in place but get more leverage out of it. So that's kind of where we are with that. We're excited about going on this. and I certainly hope I've left you with something. Before we break, any questions? I know I've thrown a lot at you. Yes, and here, I'll share the mic with you.
We have a mic. We have another mic as well.
Oh, okay. Well, then go ahead, keep that. And I'll try. Yes.
So, I mean, this is an interesting perspective on a lot of people